Welcome back to another edition of No Stoplights. I want to thank our sponsors, Mickey Finn's, Marlboro PD Electric Co-op, Schofield's, Carolina Bank, Pepsi, Florence. Will elaborate on the sponsors in just a couple of minutes. I want to make sure we thank those. We thank you who have subscribed and liked our early days of podcasting. It's obvious we've got to get better at this. We anticipate getting a little bit better at this. But one of the ways we gauge and measure success is by the number of likes and subscribers we have. I've done a lousy job of explaining to the listeners and viewers how you can become a subscriber of No Stoplights. So when I don't know anything, I've got to the age in life that I know what I don't know, and when I don't know something, I find people who can explain it and articulate it much better than I. I've got this sidekick on an early morning radio show that we do called Wake Up Carolina, Dave Baker. Dave is affectionately known as the Rev. Now, he's not very affectionate about the nickname, but I like it. And I'm going to let him elaborate on exactly how you can become a subscriber to No Stoplights with Wake Up Carolina, some of the different formats and mediums and platforms we're on, and when we release our latest, greatest edition of No Stoplights.
So thank you for listening. This is my first appearance on the podcast
now,
here.
It's not really an appearance. It would be more of a verbal role.
Well, you do point that out because if you're watching on YouTube, I'm the voice off camera right now. And if you're listening on one of your on your favorite podcast platform, I'm just the voice. I'm just here talking with Ken. But we're asking you for a subscription. And if you're watching on YouTube, the like, the subscribe, comment, give us suggestions in the comment section. We appreciate all of the interaction, and we're off to a start in the podcast. We just have a handful of videos out there, and all of the response so far and all of your comments are very much appreciated. Please keep it up and interact with us as much as you can because it'll help us grow, and that's what it's all about for us. So how about that?
How about that?
Yeah.
So did you tell them what, is it Spotify? Is it YouTube?
Well, see, the way this works, now this is different than we're used to live radio and live interaction. So the podcast has already been published to the platforms, and therefore someone that's hearing us right now is listening to it on their favorite platform of choice, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcast or iHeartRadio. So all of those, wherever you're listening to us, you know where you get your podcasts, and you probably already subscribed already. That's how you knew this episode was available. And if you're watching on YouTube, again, it's just a click for a subscription, and the notification bell will give you notifications whenever we publish a new video. By the way, podcasts are scheduled to be published twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays around 10 a.m.
That would be bi-weekly.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good deal.
If you say so.
Very well explained.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the voice off camera will shut up now. And
now it's time for the genius and expert to get back to work. I do step aside from mere mortals from time to time, but now it's time for the genius to get back at work and enlighten the masses as I intend to here in a couple of seconds. For those of you, Rev has explained how you can like and subscribe to the podcast. The name No Stoplights, where does that come from? I am a former lieutenant governor of South Carolina. I unceremoniously was removed from office after violating campaign finance laws. If you want to know the rest of the story, Google it, look it up. It'll blame me for everything this side of climate change, I would imagine, or global warming. And I'm okay with that. But my story's a bit weird, unique. I'm from the private sector. I'm a business owner. I was raised in a family business in a town called Pamplico, South Carolina. Pamplico is a small town in rural South Carolina without a stoplight. And when I ran for lieutenant governor, every candidate imaginable, we all had blue suits and red ties, black suits and blue ties, and we all were going to better educate your kid. We're going to demonstrate physical restraint. We're going to restore order to the sanity of American politics. And it's easy to get lost in the, lost in the shuffle of candidates who say the same thing, by and large look the same way. I got elected to Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina the same time Nikki Haley got elected governor of South Carolina. Tim Scott was actually an early candidate for lieutenant governor in South Carolina. Trey Gowdy ran for Congress in 2010 in South Carolina. Mick Mulvaney, who eventually worked in the Trump administration, ran against John Spratt. Kind of a weird class of Republican candidates in South Carolina. They've gone on to bigger and better things in the political world. I think I've got a better life by second guessing what people like them do in the way they go about their business. But back to the name. When I decided to run, I tried to figure out a way to distinguish myself from some of the other candidates. And I can remember, real quick story about running for county council. I ran for county council in a district that had never, ever elected a Republican. I ran as a Republican against the advice of, I don't know, the 3 or 4 people that I trusted in matters relating to politics. I won that seat and got encouraged to run for Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina. I had a kind of a business perspective. I was very pragmatic in my worldviews. I'm conservative. I'm unapologetically conservative, but I'm kind of I'm a hodgepodge. I am a very pragmatic person with conservative roots and values. I've got a bit of a libertarian streak about me. But when I ran for lieutenant governor, once again, elaborating on the previous comment, everybody was saying the same damn thing, and I couldn't get any traction. So I began to try and create somewhat of a personality, and a part of my personality was I'm a college dropout from a town with no stoplight. Take what I say for what it's worth. And it it worked. It really did. I went on to win that race. A couple of nuggets of information that I think you would find a bit interesting. When I decided to run for county council in 2004, I had to go register to vote. And that's right. I was not even a registered voter when I decided to pursue not a career in politics, but a job in politics. I'd gotten real frustrated with local government about some of the regulations, mandates, stipulations that they were requiring of my family business in the private sector. So I go get registered to vote. I win that seat in 2004. In 2006, some of the big wheels, the big shots in Republican politics in South Carolina sat me down, if you will, and said we needed a business guy to consider running for a statewide office, and the rest, as they say in Paris and Pamplico, is histoire. The first session of South Carolina Senate I ever witnessed, I presided over. So the first time I ever voted in my life, I voted for myself as a candidate for Florence County Council. I don't apologize for that. I didn't care much for politics prior to that. The responsibility of one of the responsibilities Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina had doesn't have that responsibility any longer. They run in tandem now. In other words, Henry McMaster ran on a ticket with Pamela Yvette. When I ran, it was Nikki Haley running for governor and Ken Ard running for lieutenant governor. I was the Republican nominee. Obviously, she was the Republican nominee for governor. But one of the responsibilities of the lieutenant governor of South Carolina was to preside over the state Senate. So the first session of the Senate in South Carolina I ever saw, I presided over. Jerry Clower, famous Southern comedian, the late Jerry Clower, says the first college football game he ever saw, he played in. I can relate to that. The first session of South Carolina Senate I ever witnessed, I presided over. So I'm unapologetically rural. I'm unapologetically Southern. I have a bit of an accent, in case you haven't detected. I don't flaunt it, but I don't deny it. I don't hide from it. It is what it is. But I do think that if you'll give us an opportunity, we'll prove to you, viewer, and we hope subscriber, that we care enough about the issues to try and understand at a serious and complicated level. My wife refers to me as the most complicated, simple man God ever made. I think that's a compliment. I'm not sure, but I think she means that somewhat complimentary. So let's try this to see if we can gain a little trust and support of a viewing and listening audience. There are 3 issues in American politics today that I think are paramount and very newsworthy, very centric to the political debate and discourse in America today. One is, obviously, Donald Trump. I mean, as long as Trump's on the scene, he's going to be a relevant political figure. He's unlike anybody I've ever seen before. He is a political blunt instrument. He is a one-man wrecking crew. He is the biggest motivator to turn out for and against that American politics has ever had. I understand some of that. I mean, I get that Trump cuts both ways. He is he's narcissistic. He can be vulgar. He can be indecent. He can be irreverent. But it's something the American political observer, I mean the voter in general were looking for somebody who didn't sound nor act like everybody else. So you've got Donald Trump potentially indicted in New York, the Southern District of New York. The New York DA is considering whether or not to indict Donald Trump and eventually arrest Donald Trump, and he'll face some sort of criminal charge. Will it be a misdemeanor and misrepresenting a business expense? Will it be a felony and a violation of campaign finance? It's pretty odd that we're going to set American precedent on indicting a former president or sitting president or a candidate for president on a third-rate misdemeanor, but it is what it is. And the district attorney in New York ran, saying that if given the opportunity, he was going to indict Donald Trump. So nobody should be surprised by that. I think Trump wins if he's indicted, and that's going to be a big story. There's no doubt about it. If we've got a former president, current candidate, and front runner of one of the two major political parties under threat of indictment, that's a big-ass deal. I mean, there's no doubt about that. We've got another story that is beginning to evolve, and that is the Oversight Committee of James Comer beginning to investigate the Bidens. Now, here's some interesting information, because once again, a lot of what Trump is dealing with is conjecture. It's speculation. We don't know exactly, what is true and what's not true. We know that Trump paid $130,000 to keep a woman quiet about an affair that she says they have. There's no disputing that. I mean, there's no doubt that Donald Trump paid $130,000 to make Stormy Daniels. I mean, it would be I think we had somebody explain it in a pretty appropriate way. It would be a non-disclosure in normal business practice. But with Donald Trump, it's hush money because, once again, he's not exactly the media darling that a Barack Obama was, or a Bill Clinton was, or for that matter, maybe even a Ronald Reagan was. But there's this other story, and I'm trying to get my hands on some notes here about the Biden family. There's subpoenaed bank records now that the oversight has in their possession that clearly show that a Chinese energy company paid the Biden family about $3 million. Now, I don't want to go into great detail because I told you there's a bigger story out there that I want to pay attention to. We try to explain as briefly as we can the situation with Donald Trump. The story with Joe Biden is very interesting because his son, his daughter-in-law, his brother have clearly been paid by a Chinese energy company. I mean, there's no question about that. What did they do? I would be speculating. It would be complete and total conjecture, but there's no doubt that the family of Joe Biden has been paid fairly handsomely by a Chinese energy company. There's a paper trail here, but subpoenaed bank records clearly show $3 million from a Chinese energy company goes to a couple of other subsidiaries, ends up in the bank accounts of the Biden family. We'll follow that closely, but I still don't believe. I mean, Trump, as I said, is not just a big story; it's a big-ass story. And then you got the Biden-Chinese story that I think is going to eventually be a big story. The mainstream media probably won't cover this as in-depth as they will Trump. Imagine that. But the biggest story in America today, as far as I'm concerned, is the situation with the banks. I'm not an economist. I'm not a professor. I'm not a banker. I'm a business guy who is, once again, whose political opinions have been shaped by events and experiences and a pretty good understanding of the economy. I like to tell people what I know about the economy. I didn't learn at a seminar where they give you a Diet Pepsi or a Mountain Dew Zero and a ham sandwich and a brownie wrapped in plastic wrap. I mean, I've lived it, and I've learned a lot about the economy through living it, not in an academic or scholarly sort of fashion. But if you really go back to the fundamentals of the banking situation, I think the majority of Americans, I mean, if you're watching this podcast, then you're probably a little more aware than most Americans. I think the majority of you listening to my voice, as I intently look into this camera, are aware that the government has, since 2008, been in the business of manipulating or distorting the economy. I could argue very easily that the last vote Congress took in a matter relating to the economy was the Troubled Asset Relief Plan of 2008, the bailout. the bailout of the banks. We had subprime lending. We had a mortgage meltdown. We had just a big disaster in the housing sector. The banks were participatory. The borrower was participatory. The construction companies. I mean, everybody's got a little blood on their hands from what happened in 2008. But if you really go back to 2008 and move forward and you watch what the Fed has done, you watch what the Treasury has done, you watch what the FDIC is in the process of doing, it's hard to argue that the way we've governed the economy is not anti-democratic. Why do I say that? Who elects the Fed chair? I mean, we the people don't. Who elects the Treasury, the Secretary of Treasury? We the people don't. And we do indirectly. We elect the president. The president appoints a Treasury Secretary. So in the most indirect way imaginable, some of these administrators, some of these department heads, some of these experts in the field of finance, I mean, they are beholden to the people that we elect. But the biggest problem in America today that I perceive is that the U.S. Congress, and I'm talking about the federal government, I'm not talking about state, and I'm not talking about local government. The federal government has shirked its responsibility to create economic policy and be held accountable to the economic policy that they pass. The government has the responsibility to appropriate. The legislative branch has the responsibility to appropriate funds, and we're spending about $1 trillion a year that we don't have. I'm rounding off. It could be $800 billion one year, $1.2 trillion the next year, but we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion margin between our revenues and our expenditures. We're upside down in the business world, and I think the most telling commentary I could give is, I mean, obviously the Fed chair does what they do, and they're in the business of fiat currency and quantitative easing, a little bit of quantitative tightening now, and but it's a monetary policy and employment. Now, personally, I think the Fed should be tasked with one responsibility, and that is monetary policy. I don't think the Fed should have anything at all to do with unemployment. I think they should address inflation via monetary policy. Personally, I think the Fed should be abolished. But I'm not king. I don't get in my way. That's asking a lot. But I think the Fed has been far more damaging to the state of affairs of the average American and their existence in our free market economy than they have been beneficial. So I'm on the record. I mean, I think a full review, a full vetting, a full better understanding of the Federal Reserve, and if you're honest with yourself, I think it will lead us to abolish the Fed and create another system of which we address and monitor, the monetary supply issues in our economy. But I want to go back to the anti-democratic way. I mean, that's kind of a red meat word on conservative media. But the Fed, the United States Congress is elected by we the people. They are to appropriate. They are to work budgets through committees and subcommittees and debates. And out of that comes, if it's $1 trillion upside down, then they're held accountable to the public. Tell the people, hey, I'm a member of Congress, and I voted on a budget that spends $1 trillion we don't have. But instead of Congress doing that, they've deferred to continuing resolutions and omnibus bills, and out of that comes, the Fed basically working with Congress to make sure those debt obligations are secured by some degree. I mean, we call it government finance, but it's really fiat currency. It's money created out of thin air. That's the anti-democratic point that I'm trying to make. Congress has shirked its responsibility. The Fed has stepped in, and once again, the Fed is not elected by we the people. Therefore, economic policy is not democratic in nature. That leads me down this road. Last week, Silicon Valley Bank got in financial trouble, and we realized very quickly that the Fed was probably, or the federal government, not the Fed, but the Treasury Secretary, the FDIC, the Fed chair, were probably going to intervene and save the day. But they were going to, once again, my words are distort and manipulate the realities of the free market. The free market has a certain animal instinct that is required. There has to be moral hazard. There has to be failure. There has to be success. There has to be those realities, or we honestly don't have a free market. But I was on the radio show last week and was led to believe, some of my research led me to believe that when you looked at the situation with Silicon Valley Bank in California, Signature Bank in New York, they were a bit isolated. They were not one-offs, but they were not reflective of the banking industry as a whole. So I began trying to explore and better understand, and I'm talking about the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, New York Times, CNBC, Bloomberg, Forbes, Financial Times, the likely suspects. And there's some people out there that you can trust. There's some people out there you can't trust. But I went back and read and finally concluded, and this would have been about the middle of last week after the news broke on Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, that there were somewhere in the neighborhood of $650 billion of unrealized losses in investment securities. I won't bore you with the details about what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, it was really about tech startups, their inability to loan money. They made investments in, it was a mismatched portfolio. They invested in T-bills and mortgage-backed securities, and when the interest rates began to aggressively raise, they didn't have any hedge. I mean, they were so invested in financial instruments that were going to be significantly devalued as a result of a raising interest rate environment. But I want to go back to the number, $650 billion. I mean, when I left here over the weekend, I was pretty comfortable that that was going to be the number. I'm not quite as damn comfortable that that's the number anymore. Once again, remember unrealized losses on investment securities. I mean, I could hold this up. We got the Fed funds rate. It's correlated with some of these unrealized losses on investment securities. Over the weekend, the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal. I'm no big fan of mainstream media. And I guess the problem that I have with the mainstream media is on rare occasions, they show you their ability to be true journalists, to do a damn good job of understanding whatever issue it is. They have resources. They have infrastructure. They have intellectual capital. I mean, they have smart people on staff there. It's a travesty that they've sold their soul in deference to one political brand over another. That's not the nature of journalism. That's not what reporting should be about. I understand that the majority of journalists are liberal. I accept that. I'll accept the wink and nod. But once they become somewhat of an activist agent for one of the political parties, and really and truly the uniparty is something I talk a lot about. That means, I'll give you Trump as an example. So Donald Trump is under attack every second of every day by the Democrat establishment. The Democrat establishment are doing everything they can to attack Donald Trump. You would expect the Republican establishment to do everything they can to defend a former Republican president and current frontrunner in the Republican Party, but that's not the reality. The reality is the Republican establishment have kind of gotten out of the way and let the Democrat establishment have at it. So Trump is kind of a man on an island. So you've got a uniparty at work here. So when I start talking about finance and Wall Street and banking and the financialization of the economy, I'm not accusing one party or another. When someone tells you that the two-party system in America today can't agree on anything, that's a lie. I mean, that's simply a lie. The two-party system in America today cannot agree on abortion. They can't agree on climate change. They can't agree on gay marriage. They can't agree on education. They can't agree on infrastructure. But they can agree to spend $1 trillion a year they don't have. I mean, there is no doubt about that. And it's not in the best interest of the American people, but rather the special interest, the moneyed interest. The cathedral is what we refer to those or that organization as. But enough of my getting off the exit ramp on the media. The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal did a lot of due diligence, and they refer to two studies. They actually analyzed these two studies that come from Stanford and Columbia University, two of our more esteemed academic institutions. There were analysis done that says instead of the $650 billion unrealized investment security losses, there's potentially $1.7 to $2 trillion of unrealized losses. That could be cataclysmic. I mean, that could be catastrophic. Remember what 2008 felt like? I don't want to ever feel that way again. I told you I'm in business. I've been in business all my life. And the knot in your gut when you sense that the entire system is about to fail is something that I don't ever want to experience again, but we may. And I'm not apocalyptic. I'm not one of these doomsdayers. I'm a reasonable guy from a town with no stoplight. And but when you read the Post and when you read the Wall Street Journal, once again, when I left for the weekend, I was fairly comfortable that the number was somewhere in the neighborhood of $650 billion. The Washington Post and Wall Street Journal have convinced me, per these analysis done by Stanford and Columbia, that the number's probably closer to 1.7 and $2 trillion. If that's the number, we've got multiple bank failures. We're going to have a lot more distorting and manipulation of our economy. The Wall Street Journal and this study says, and I'll read verbatim, that 186 banks are in distress, possibly to the point of seeking a bailout. The study estimates that hundreds of banks are in worse shape than Silicon Valley Bank, hundreds have larger losses than Silicon Valley Bank, and hundreds have lower capitalization buffers in case of distress than Silicon Valley Bank. Remember, we're in a raising interest rate environment. I've got a theory that Wall Street Journal nor the Washington Post touched on. If you're a banking executive and you started work in the financial sector in 2008-9, you've never ever done your job in a raising rate and a raising interest rate environment. And to say you got to go from one playbook to another, they only have one playbook. I mean, if you're 40 years old in the financial sector, if you're 45 in the financial sector, you spent your entire career in a quantitative easing, suppressed interest rate environment. Well, all of a sudden, the Fed announces it's no longer going to quantitative ease. It's not buying mortgage-backed securities. It's not investing as much fiat currency into the economy to basically distort, manipulate, my words again. And you're starting to see some people have to earn their money. I'm sorry. I mean, it's pretty. I don't want to say it's easy. I mean, I couldn't do it. I mean, I don't understand synthetic derivatives and hedges and puts, and I mean that's kind of a lingo in a business for the high Q graduates of Ivy League institutions that we've trusted or entrusted the controls of our financial world to. How's that working out? But I do believe that once you stop the quantitative easing, once you start aggressively raising interest rates, some of these younger financial gurus have never experienced any of that. And I think it's really, I think we're having a hard learning curve. And I think we're experiencing a lot of pain and anguish, and I can't imagine what it's like. I mean, wow, look at me and how good I am at this job. Well, damn it, you ought to be good at the job. I mean, interest rates are near zero. We're quantitative eased. I mean, the Fed's pumped $6.3 trillion into the economy in the name of COVID relief. We suppress production. We increase liquidity. What do you think happens there? Let me take a wild guess. You ready? Town with no stoplight. College dropout. Inflation. Macroeconomic stimulus always leads to inflationary pressures. Not sometimes, not most time, not 9 out of 10 times. Every single time the government macro stimulates the economy, you're going to have inflation. The first time in human history, I went 50 years of my life and never said for the first time in human history. I've said it more in the last decade than I care to mention or remember, and the majority of my pronouncements have been relating to what we've done financially as a matter of the Fed, the FDIC, any of the financial sector. When you're talking about the financial sector, once again, Trump, president, that affects my life somewhat. Biden, president, affects my life somewhat. This is going to have a direct effect or impact on every single American family. I want to give you a couple of statistics. You ready? Last week, the Fed discount window. Now, that's the discount window where the desperate banks go. That would be like the crack addict selling the most treasured possession he has. He's already sold everything to buy more crack. He's an addict. God bless him. He needs help. He can't get his feces consolidated. And he just really and truly is crying out for help. The addict has one thing. Maybe it's his high school ring. Maybe it's his mom's. I don't know. I don't know what it would be. But at some point in time, they sell that. Why? Because they're a junkie. They're an addict. They don't know any other way but to try and sell possessions to get their fix and feed their drug habit. But when you look at the Fed discount window, I mean, that's where desperate banks go when nobody else will lend. Last week, the Fed discount window loaned out about $152 billion. Sounds like a lot of money because it is. Remember we talked about 2008 a second ago? At the height of the 2008 banking crisis, it was about $111 billion. So think about 2008, think about the discount window, think about $111 billion. And we know what 08 looked like. We know what 09 and 10 and 11 looked like. Well, last week the Fed, $39 billion more at the lender of last resort. That freaks me out. I'm not an economist. I'm not a banker. I didn't go to Stanford, didn't go to Duke, didn't go to Vanderbilt. But that freaks me out to know that there are two comparative numbers, that there's a case study that shows once the Fed discount window begins lending money out at that rate, there's a storm brewing. I mean, there is no way around this. Contagion, we hear a lot about that word. I could speculate and say the Wall Street Journal's nailed it. There's going to be 186 banks fail. What will the Fed do? What will the FDIC do? What will the Treasury Department do? What will Congress do? I can tell you what Congress will do. Congress sit on his ass and let the Fed, the Treasury, the FDIC try to fix it because they don't want to take a vote that is critical, controversial, or may put their political well-being at risk. So here's the crux of the matter. You ready? Here's why it matters to you and I. If the Fed blinks, if the Fed and its Fed's fund rate, the benchmark rate, which is what we base a lot of our financing charges on, if the Fed pivots or pauses, as many expect it to, they have paid respect to the ones that pull the strings. In other words, the banking sector is in turmoil. There are other Silicon Valley banks. There are other signature banks out there that may be on the precipice of failure, may not be on the precipice of failure. But if the Fed pivots or pauses, that they've basically admitted that they're no longer waging a war on inflation. And that's choosing bankers over workers. I mean, if the financial sector is at risk, I get it. I mean, I understand it. But there has to be some moral hazard. There has to be some realities of the private sector that, that rooster comes home to roost. I mean, if you live irresponsibly, if you don't know how to run a bank, then you fail and somebody buys the bank for pennies on the dollar and they run it as the bank should be run. But if the Fed pivots, if the Fed pauses, if the Fed calls off the dogs in matters relating to trying to curtail or contain inflation, they basically told the average American, hey, we're sorry that hamburger's $20, but we've got bankers to take care of. That's the anti-democratic part of this economy. Once again, you vote for members of Congress. You vote for U.S. senators. You send those people to Washington to not only decide when a woman can have an abortion, how much money we should spend on education, but economic policy is something that we expect these people to be somewhat accomplished, diligent, and understanding of. And they've simply been asleep at the switch. They've allowed the economic policy making in America to be farmed out to the Fed, the Treasury, the FDIC, and once again, if the Fed decides to abandon the inflation fight, it has begun, because once again, I think the rate is 4.5, 4.75, somewhere thereabout. I think the Fed fund rate is somewhere around 4.5 if they raise it a quarter point. Yeah, 4.5 to 4.75. And they've been fairly desperate in their attempt to try and curtail or contain inflation. But guys, we financed a COVID relief plan at $6.3 trillion. We increased the money supply by 40% since March of 2020. I mean, how do you fix your mouth to say that? The largest, most prosperous economy in the history of mankind, basically out of thin air, increased the money supply by 40%. And some of the folks that we trust to make these decisions that relate to our monetary policy and our economic policy, I mean, they use words like transitory and fleeting, and inflation will rear its head, but it'll be contained quicker than we ever imagined. And we made a grave mistake. I mean, we made a terrible, terrible error. I'm not an armchair quarterback. I'm not trying to second guess anybody's intent or motivation. But once again, who didn't see inflation, rampant inflation coming when you once again create $6.3 trillion out of midair? That's why I think this is the central issue facing the American people today. It will have political consequences, no doubt. There will be Keynesian economists that say, well, the modern monetary theory of today is something we need to abide by, and if the government owns its own debt, it doesn't matter what that number is. I don't know that. I mean, that's above my pay grade. I don't understand modern monetary theory. I don't agree with Keynesian economists. I'm a free market guy that believes eventually if you spend more than you have over an elongated period of time, there's a day of reckoning. I don't know if this is the day of reckoning. I don't know what the other side looks like. I do know, and I've tried to illustrate the best I know how, that when you, as members of Congress, farm out economic policy and monetary policy, and the Fed is responsible for monetary policy. Once again, I would abolish the Fed and figure out another way to monitor and manage our monetary policy. But there's no doubt about it. But I think in closing, I want to say this. 2008 was a long time ago. And that's the last time I can remember Congress going on the record and agreeing to vote on an economic policy of consequence. We deserve better than that. I mean, you as a voter, we as Americans who trust our three branches of government to govern the greatest nation in the history of mankind, we deserve Congress to not farm out some of the critical components of economic policy, and that's exactly what we've done, and it's got us in the biggest damn mess you can imagine. Can we work out of this? I don't know. What is the point of no return? I don't have a clue. It's $35 trillion in federal debt, the point of which we lose our status as the preferred currency of global markets. I don't know. Somebody asked me a while back, what do you think the number one thing to pay close attention to when it comes to, our situation financially as a nation? And I think it's the petrodollar. I mean, I really and truly believe that the second the world decides to execute an energy trade in something other than the dollar is the day that a lot of these roosters come home to roost at the same time. And that's a scary proposition. I mean, it really and truly is. Once again, I'm a college dropout from a town with no stoplight. I don't have an economics degree from Stanford. I don't have a law degree from Harvard. I believe very little of what they say. They've hardly ever participated in the free market, in the private sector. They've read a lot about it. They studied a lot about it. They a lot of their scholarly reporting is done as if it were in a flight simulator. And if the numbers don't work out 6 months from now, we just get back in the flight simulator and we try to land the plane one more time. That's a hell of a way to run an economy, but it's the way we're running our economy. And if we're not careful, guys, we're going to get ourselves in a position that there seems to be a very difficult path forward. There is no easy answer to this. I mean, if the Fed decides to pivot and pause, I understand it. I mean, they're trying to save the financial sector, of which we all depend on. But if the Fed decides to pivot and pause, they're basically admitting that they failed in addressing inflation, and the average working class American is going to have to do the best they can to make ends meet. I want to thank our sponsors. Carolina Bank serves communities throughout northeastern South Carolina, offering a wide range of services to meet every personal or business need, from straightforward accounts to complex finances. They're prepared to help you reach your financial goals. Carolina Bank, banking on tradition since 1936. Member FDIC. Schofield's Ace Hardware, your one-stop shop for all hardware, paint and lawn and garden needs, plus all things sporting goods, including firearms, safes, clothing, footwear, and more. Pepsi of Florence represent the entire product line of PepsiCo, one of the world's leading food and beverage companies. Pepsi of Florence also serve brands from other great companies such as Dr. Pepper, Canada Dry, Lipton Tea, Gatorade, and various regional brands. Mickey Finn's, largest South Carolina liquor wholesaler, serving every county in the state, largest bourbon selection statewide. They ship wines to 43 states, opening soon a new beverage warehouse across from Buc-ee's on I-95 in Florence. They support USC athletics, including Williams-Brice and Colonial Life Arena. Marlboro PD Electric Co-op. If you're in big business and looking for an industrial park in the South to build your new plant, consider Marlboro PD Electric Co-op's new PD Commerce Center, an industrial park located at the I-95 exit in Florence, South Carolina. Check it out at MPDC Co-op or PDEC.com.